All right, Medea, thank you so much for sitting here with me today. I'm hoping we can talk about your long-standing activism and some of the interesting tactics you use just because of their immediacy and visibility, making them so striking, as well as how that connects to challenging American empire and specifically how that works with finding or fighting for peace and justice in Palestine.
Well, it's great to be with you, Paul. I wish I could say that over these many years that I've been involved, I'm 71 now, I started when I was in high school, that I could say that it's helped to make the U.S. less of an aggressive empire, but on the contrary, the U.S. has gotten more and more aggressive over the years. The Pentagon budget has just been exploding. I think it's in some ways becoming harder to penetrate the military-industrial complex, the whole web of what we call revolving door that brings people into government and then into the corporations that make money from these wars. But I would say that this latest 10 months of the genocide in Gaza has really woken a lot of people up, not just to what Israel is doing, but to the larger issue of U.S. support for wars, U.S. empire, and I think we might be on the cusp of a new movement.
Excellent. Actually, yeah, I want to return to that. I'm wondering, before we do that in earnest, whether you can speak to how you got in, because you've been in it for quite a while, anti-war efforts, and how that eventually led to you also working in solidarity with Palestine.
I started as an anti-war activist in the 1960s when I was in high school and the Vietnam War was raging. And I realized, what are we doing sending our brothers, our sisters, our loved ones, people my age, thousands of miles away to kill people they never heard about, they didn't know anything about, they had no problem with. And I started learning more that my government lies to me, that war is a horrible thing that must be opposed, and that it's our job as people living in the United States to try to stop our government from having this aggressive obsession to trying to manipulate other governments around the world. And I learned more by traveling. Sometimes when you live in the United States, you think that the United States is the only great country in the world. The chants you hear today of USA, USA. I think, my goodness, there's over 190 countries around the world, and most of them are just beautiful countries. So for me, it was leaving the US and being able to see the United States with other eyes that really opened up a whole world to me. For example, traveling to Latin America, I learned about what my government was doing in Latin America over decades that I never learned about in high school. I never learned about in my time in college. I did drop out of college to become more of an activist full time. But when I was in Latin America, I learned that my government had overthrown the democratically elected governments of countries throughout Latin America. And I went to Africa, and I learned that my government, any time that there was an effort to get rid of a colonial regime and create a new, exciting country that might have called itself socialist or not socialist, the US was right there supporting the opposition and trying to destroy any good model of a new kind of society. And so I saw a lot about the results of my government's policies, and I became a lifelong activist. I mean, I couldn't make a living being an activist, so I did have to get jobs along the way, but I always found time to become involved in movements to stop my government from trying to overthrow and manipulate the governments of other countries.
I was going to get to this a little later on, but since you raised some points that are connected with it, I'm wondering if you have any insight into because you've seen it up close for so long, I should specify, why does America, in your view, when you look at everything, continue to still meddle in the affairs of other countries, other people, autonomous peoples, indigenous peoples, including Palestine?
Well, I think in good part it's about money, it's about resources. You know, I could point to examples where it's about oil, it's about getting access to other people's minerals, land, those kind of things. And then there is this big, what we call now the military-industrial complex that we were warned about in the 1960s by our President and General Eisenhower, who said, beware of the unwarranted power of this military-industrial complex that has a life of its own because it is a many-tentacled industry, government that benefits, that profits from war and destruction and death. And so that's one side of things. Then there are lobby groups in the United States that lobby for particular policies. In the case of Gaza, we have, or the case of Israel, we have this very pro-Israel lobby groups, a Jewish one called AIPAC, some that are Christian Zionists. They have a big influence in our government affairs as well. And then there's just the mindset that the United States is the most powerful, important country in the world, that we have the right and the obligation to control the world, US hegemony. And there are many people that buy into that. And even though today there is a multipolar world, China is a very important power. There are the alliances like the BRICS that are a powerful counterweight to the US. There still is this mentality that the US has to control the world. And that's why we're so heavily involved in the Middle East. That's why we're so heavily involved in trying to weaken Russia through supporting the war in Ukraine. That's why we're so heavily involved in anti-China buildup in the Indo-Pacific. All of this comes from this mentality that the US has the right and the obligation to be the sole hegemon in the world.
And of course, as is well known, you and Code Pink directly challenge this, quite literally, through some of your very interesting tactics involving civil disobedience and direct action. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, and maybe, I mean, you don't have to reveal too much here, of course. How do you go about planning those actions, because they seem to happen so frequently, and you're there at the right time, and it's done so effectively, and you catch people off guard? I mean, what goes into the pre-planning or the planning?
Well, we have discovered over the years that when we organize something and invite the media to come, they almost never come. Maybe the TRT might come or Al Jazeera might come, but the US media, they don't show up. So we have to go where they are. So we go to press conferences that we hear about, and we just jump up in the middle of a press conference with our banner and give our side of things. Or we go to where the powerful people are, whether they're heads of corporations. We jump on stages when they're giving talks. We try to expose how unrepresentative the people who are supposed to represent us are. In the case of Israel, I think we've done quite a good job at running after members of Congress wherever we find them. If they're walking in the halls of Congress or going to a vote or having a town hall meeting, running up to them and asking them, why are you supporting a genocide? How many people have to die in Gaza before you will stop sending weapons there? How much money do you take from the pro-Israel lobby groups? And they have some of the most horrific answers that shows that these people are almost like monsters. They have no heart, no compassion. And when we put that on social media, and thank goodness for social media, people are like amazed. They say, who are these people? And they represent me. And then we say, call their office, do something about this, challenge them, run against them. And so this has been very useful for us. And I do think social media has been very important in spreading the message, exposing the lies, exposing the liars, and trying to get people to be more actively involved.
Do you know that there's the possibility of arrest, or there's the possibility of yourself losing your own liberty before you do that? And do you prepare for that as well, or is that sort of a secondary concern?
We know that we might be arrested at these events, and we have many people who are supporters of Code Pink who can't afford to get arrested. They might not have the right citizenship, they might have student loans, all kinds of reasons. So we know that those of us who are privileged, I mean, I'm supposed to be retired now. I don't have a job that I'm going to lose. I'm white, and it is much easier for white people when they get arrested than it is for people of color. And so I can take those risks. As I'm getting older, it's a little harder because, you know, you get thrown around. I've had my shoulder dislocated. The bones are a little more brittle. But still, I think it's important to do these actions. When we interrupt congresspeople in a hearing, we know we will get dragged out and we'll get arrested. In other situations, we never know if we'll get arrested or not. But we try to protect the people who have more to lose and put people up front who can risk that kind of arrest. And I think it's important to challenge power even if you are going to risk arrest. I mean, I have challenged presidents, whether it's Obama or Bush or Trump or even Biden, and knowing that I could well be arrested. And my colleagues do that as well, but we think the risk is worth it.
Yeah, so Medea, the federal elections in the US, I have to ask you about, they're so close now. And I know that very recently, last week I believe it was, you were at the DNC or outside the DNC. Could you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there with respect to Palestine and, of course, the larger struggle for justice in Palestine?
Well, first I want to say that Code Pink was also at the Republican convention. Okay. We think it's important to be at both because both parties have been supporting the Israeli government. And at the Republican convention, there were a lot fewer people, which actually surprised me because Trump was so terrible when he was in power. He has said that he will continue those policies when he comes back in. And so it was surprising that there were so few protesters at the Republican convention. On the other hand, it has been Biden in power during the last 10 months, and so people are angry at the administration that has been directly responsible for supporting Israel. And I think that perhaps with the change in candidate now to Kamala Harris, some people think that there is an opening there, and maybe she would not be as bad as Biden, which is something we don't know yet. But in any case, we thought it was important to be at both conventions and to be showing the world how much we object to what our government has been doing, how much we are disgusted by the fact that we, the US, the taxpayers, are the ones that have been providing the bombs that are killing the children in Gaza. And that this Biden administration recently approved a new $20 billion tranche of weapon sales to Israel that will go on for many years, no matter who is in the White House. So that's why we were there. That's why we were interrupting their fundraisers, going into their caucuses, going in on the floor of the convention, being outside at a very profound sit-in that was organized by Palestinian Americans who were asking the Democratic Convention for 2 minutes of floor time that they didn't even get. But we think it did send an important message that there are people who are protesting the policies of the Biden administration, and that the Biden administration is continuing to support the Israeli government throughout this genocide.
Yes. Do you feel that the Democratic Party has this appeal of being quote unquote sympathetic or more sympathetic to Palestinian people because in general they're regarded more as quote unquote progressive in ways that perhaps the Republican Party is not. And I'm wondering whether you can comment on that and if this kind of progressive character that the Democrats have today is fundamentally different from, say, the 60s and the anti-war efforts of that time. Was there more of a, yes, progressive character to those movements, but that were much more universalist in scope and were more mindful of racialized people outside the US in the global South? And that's perhaps something that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are not doing, or not looking at.
Well, when I look at the Democratic Party, I see that there are progressive people in that party, right. That there are certainly more Democrats who have been calling for a ceasefire. When there was a resolution for a ceasefire introduced, we couldn't get one Republican to sign on to it. Right. But then you look at the top of the party, the Biden administration, and you don't see that. You see Biden himself with this ironclad support for Israel. He's always been a tremendous supporter for Israel. And then you have to talk about the power of the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby, and especially the Jewish one called AIPAC, has given money to almost every single member of Congress, and it has helped to shape the policy to be much more pro-Israel than a lot of Democrats would like. Were it not for that strong lobby group, I think we'd see much more expressed open sympathy for the Palestinians. But any time a member of Congress has come forward and put a resolution forward for a ceasefire, for supporting Palestinian rights, they become a target of this lobby group. And this lobby group is now spending millions of dollars just on each campaign that it wants to get rid of a congressperson. And so far, it has been quite successful. And so that puts the fear into all members of Congress. Uh-oh, I better not be vocal. I better sit back on this one. I better not express myself. On the other hand, there is a powerful force coming from us, from the grassroots, that is saying to them, you better speak out. We want to hear what you have to say. Represent us. And there is this incredible disconnect, Paul, between what the majority of people in the US want, as we see through opinion polls, which is a ceasefire, stop supporting Israel, stop this militarization, this war economy that we have, and what people in Congress are doing. And so that is something that we try to show, that the people representing us, definitely the Republicans and a large portion of the Democrats, really do not represent what the people desire.
Yes. And I'm wondering if this is maybe true of American society, whether one can actually affect real change while being a member, say, a politician within this system, because it seems that at some time or another the lobby is going to approach you, or you'll be disciplined by the lobby. It's almost as if, do you feel this way, that maybe that's why you've been able to achieve so much as an activist, is because you're operating outside the system? I mean, you're confronting the system, but you're operating outside of it.
Absolutely. The system is broken. It's a horrible system that you need millions of dollars to try to counter the force of a group that is not even representing the interests of the United States. It's representing the interests of Israel. It should be marked as a foreign agent, and it's not. The system is broken. And it's not just about Israel. There's the big lobbies around the oil industry, big lobbies around pharmaceuticals, the big lobbies that exist around the weapons industries. So it's a broken system. And I have a lot of admiration for progressives who run in the system and try to work within the system, and we believe in an inside-outside strategy. But I believe the most important thing is building up outside of the electoral system, is building up a really strong base. And that's why I'm so excited about the youth that have been so involved in their college campuses, that have been really challenging their own powers that be, that run their administrations. And it is building up this outside force that's going to be the power that changes the inside strategy as well. And I think the hope lies in the streets. The hope lies in the people who are dissenting. You know, when we're in the halls of Congress, we might not get a good reception from a lot of the members, but we get a wonderful reception from the young people who come running out after us and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. We're in the cafeteria having lunch. They run up to us and they say, thank you, thank you, thank you. The young people have a very different view, and that's where the hope lies.
Seems like that's where the moral impulse is and remains intact.
That's where the moral center of our country is right now. With the people my age, not at all. With the young people, yes. And I think that we're going to see a lot of new kinds of activism that's cropping up because people's eyes have been opened. You know, when I went to the encampment in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University, they had the tents, and the tents had signs on them. And one of the signs said, fight the war machine. Yes. And I talked to the student, and she was with a whole group of students, and they said very clearly, we understand there is a war machine that keeps us constantly in some kind of war, either directly or indirectly now through proxies, but that's what we've got to change. The war machine, the war economy. You know that in every district, congressional district in the United States, there is some factory that is producing some weapon to kill people. And so that congressperson, aside from the power and the influence of the lobby, also has the influence from the workers there saying, we need these jobs. We have to change that. Instead of making weapons, those people should be making solar panels and windmills and fast trains and things for a new economy. That's what we need to change.
Absolutely. It seems that a lot of the encampments are pointing to the possibility of a more just society, including but not limited to Palestine. To your point, I noticed when I was covering the U of T encampment, there were a lot of signs about dismantling capitalism or racial capitalism. And also, what I find very interesting is the encampment movements are very intersectional. And so they bring in like diverse communities. You have people that are talking about migrant rights, laborers' rights, teachers' rights, and so forth.
You know, I'm from the Jewish community. I see so much energy among progressive Jews that have been organizing all over the United States and have been educating people in the Jewish community so that now the young people in the Jewish community tend to be pro-Palestinian. And that is a tremendous shift. There was a group that had an event during the Democratic Convention called Democratic Majority for Israel. And we went up and we busted their event and we said, there is no such thing as a Democratic Majority for Israel. Because as you said, there are people that have been in the Black movement that are for Israel, for pro-Palestinian, environmental movement that say it's ecocide what Israel is doing. We have to be against it. There are people in the labor movement. There's a lot of big labor groups like the United Auto Workers that are very influential, have maybe 500,000 members. They came out months ago for a ceasefire. So you're right. There is a very broad intersectionality that is giving a lot of strength. And that's what gives me hope that we're able to counter, as time goes by, we will be able to counter the force of the moneyed interests that have been so pro-Israel. But you know, it's not just money interests. I have to say something else. There are a strong group of Christian Zionists, like a group called Christians United for Israel. They are massive. They have these mega churches. They are huge. And we find people in Congress who are messianic like them. My granddaddy told me that Israel, that the Jews are the chosen people, and that's why we have to support Israel, and I will always support Israel. There is that element as well. And I hope that as time goes by, we're going to move beyond that.
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that, because anthropologically, I have to say, there's indignation, I feel, certainly when I'm seeing the videos and these responses that you're getting from these congresspersons. But then anthropologically, I think, like, how did someone come to adopt this view? Like, this person is a human being. How did they come to adopt such a hateful perspective? It just doesn't seem like anyone naturally would gravitate. I mean, I feel Rousseauian, if I can use that word, in my sort of view of humanity. I don't feel we have this this terrible side to us that we're inclined to dislike or hate. So how does this happen? And so, you know, I think we might end up interrogating some of these subcultures and, you know, the ideologies that they've been passing down. And
absolutely. I mean, when I see this incredible documentary that TRT did of Holy Redemption, and I see these young people with the Torah, and, you know, I grew up with reading the Torah, and I see them so distorted, so twisted, and I see that among the Christians as well. You just wonder how religion that's supposed to be about compassion and love thy neighbor got so twisted, and that we have to work to turn back this kind of hatred and make especially young people understand that no matter what your religion is and whether you have any religious beliefs at all, we are put on this earth to love each other, to have compassion for each other, to help those who are hurting the most in this world. I see pictures on television of what's happening in Sudan, and my heart breaks for these people. It's not just about what's happening in Gaza, it's anywhere in the world where people are suffering. That's where we have to put our attention and do something to make people's lives better in this world.
I just want to let audiences know too that you're quite an accomplished writer, and I wanted to ask a little, just as a last question, about what we're seeing with the drone violence in Gaza, because you wrote a book, you know, not too long ago, 2013, I believe it was, on drone violence, and whether at that time you were able to anticipate at all this level of indiscriminate drone killing we're seeing in Gaza, and whether there was a chance for the international community to stop it along the way.
Absolutely. When I grew up in the days of Vietnam, there was a huge anti-war movement because there was what we call a draft. So people, young men at 18 were sent off automatically to fight. And this helped create a youth movement, a youth anti-war movement. As years went by, those in power realized that if we're going to fight wars, we better find other ways to do it, where Americans are not getting killed, because when they do get killed, that creates an anti-war sentiment. And so over the years, we've seen a transition to ways of fighting either proxy wars or the kinds of warfare where there's no American even in the cockpit. There is no chance that an American's going to get killed because they're manipulating a drone from a desert in Nevada. And so I saw that happening during the Iraq and Afghan wars. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the ultimate way of fighting wars where no American is going to get killed. And so Americans aren't going to care at all. And that's why I wrote that book and really did predict that this was going to be more and more of the ways that the US was going to get involved in wars. And I said at the time in the book that this is going to be a blowback because this is not very complicated technology, and other countries are going to replicate it, whether it's our allies, and I say that in quotes, like Israel, or whether it's countries like Iran that has a well-developed industry of producing drones. So now we see drones all over the place. And yes, there are some drones, of course, that are just taking pictures of fields and helping farmers and things like that. But the drones that are being used for killing, we could have and should have done something about that a long time ago. And now we're moving more and more towards autonomous drones, where you don't even need a person in the loop at all. You could just program these drones to go kill. And it's getting scarier and scarier. And I think that we as a human race, whether it's around the drones or, let's talk about nuclear weapons and how close we are now to a nuclear war, whether it's between in the fight around Ukraine or it's in the antagonistic approach we have towards China, another country with nuclear weapons, or Israel that has nuclear weapons, Iran close to nuclear weapons. There is a UN ban on nuclear weapons, and we, the people, must get on board and force our countries, and of course it has to be the countries that have all these nuclear weapons, to sign onto that ban if we're going to keep existing as a civilization. We have two existential threats to the world. One is nuclear weapons and the other is climate, and we have to get serious about both of them if we are to have a planet to pass on to our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you, Medea. I really appreciate so many things you've elucidated, but I also want to mention that I feel so much of what you're saying is a call to action. So thank you for that. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts or observations?
Well, one is to mention the organization that I'm part of, Code Pink, and it's grown a lot in this last year, and we're excited about getting new members and supporters, and you can find us online, codepink.org, and of course through the social media. And then just to say that being in Turkey is almost a huge weight off my shoulders, to be in a society where people caring not only about what's happening in Palestine, but to be in a country where people do have much more of a feeling of being part of a larger global society, caring about the world. And that's why I think it's so important that people of the United States get a chance to travel, to see and talk to other people, and recognize that instead of chanting USA, USA, as if we're the only beautiful country in the world, they should take a look at places like this and recognize the world is a very, very beautiful, wonderful place full of wonderful people, and that we have to learn to cooperate with each other instead of fighting each other.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Medea.
Thank you.